Welcome to Modern Farm Business Podcast. This podcast is designed to help the farm leader bring their business to the next level. We'll cover everything from leadership and finance to strategy and planning. I'm your host, Dean Hefta. Joining me today is Elaine Froese, a professional speaker, writer, and coach who specializes in helping farm families work through issues surrounding succession, business, or, that family favorite, communication. Elaine is known as Canada's farm whisperer, and she's been a columnist in Grainews for 20 years. Elaine is a member of the Canadian Association of Farm Advisors and the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. She's also the author of several books, including Farming's In-Law Factor and her most recent release, Building Your Farm Legacy. Elaine, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Dean. Thanks.
Now, I have to ask, Farm Whisperer is quite a title. How did you come to be so involved in helping farm families with their hurdles?
Well, I've been working in agriculture for over 40 years now. I started out as an extension home economist, and in the States you would call me a county home economist. And then back in 1993, there was a succession planning course offered by Manitoba Agriculture, where as follow-up they asked me to go to people's kitchen tables with my flip charts. And it came to pass in 2003 that I took my coaching training at the Hudson Institute of Santa Barbara in California, and at the same time took 22 days of training in conflict resolution when I discovered the whole wiring of being a coach. And so for the last 15 years, I've been focused on helping farm families figure out what they all want and how to communicate that to each other and create some certainty around their future and some timelines for agreement, and then be really committed to getting it done. So the Farm Whisperer name came from an article that Andrew Douglas wrote about me in Faith Today magazine after he'd written an article on my work for Farm Credit Canada. So that was probably about 5 years ago.
Cool. And certainly you've seen the whole spectrum of dynamics on the farm, and I appreciate you sharing some of those perspectives with us today. And, an area that you've spent a lot of time in and doesn't really get talked about that much, but can be a real issue in the life of the farm, is the in-laws. Mm-hmm. It's a big enough topic that you wrote a book about it. What are some of the landmines that you see farms really need to understand when it comes to this whole in-law dynamic? Well,
the way the book came about, Dean, is I had a lot of farmers, guys, coming up to me after seminars and saying, Elaine, I really need help with my daughter-in-law. And so the book cover has a brown egg amongst many white eggs, and I have women coming up to me with Twitter hashtags saying, Elaine, I am the brown egg. And so the real factor with farming, of course, is we have two systems. We have a family system that's very highly interlinked with the business system, which is the farm. And the in-law factor is not just daughter-in-laws. It can also be son-in-laws, because son-in-laws also come back to the family farm where their wives are the successors. And so the things I think that the core premise of the book is first of all, you have to understand conflict as a business risk management strategy. So we have a whole chapter on the culture of agriculture. So you may have people coming into your farm team who didn't grow up on a farm. So what are you doing to educate them and be clear about what your unwritten rules and expectations are? And secondly, the next chapter deals with conflict, because if you do conflict well and can attack the problem without attacking the person and find out what your common interests are, the tagline is how to have more harmony and less conflict on family farms. And I think having more harmony is what everybody wants, which is the common interest. But people get entrenched, Dean, in these positions about, well, if it's not my way or the highway, or if she's a girl from the city, she has nothing to add to this farm, or if the son-in-law is coming back, well, he'll never be a shareholder because he's not blood, or whatever these crazy things are that people think about but don't actually express to each other. So the in-law factor is really about making sure everybody on your farm team has a voice and what the roles and expectations are. So I wrote a column this year that people can find on my website at farmfamilycoach.com called Where Is It Written? Or Unwritten Expectations. And when I was speaking last year, Dean, I mentioned to a group of 350 farm women, Where is it written that a good farm woman has to have a garden? And Twitter just went on fire because these women said, thank you, Elaine, for giving me permission not to have a garden. I don't want one. I don't have time. I have an off-farm job, but everybody expects me to be here 100 hours a week. So I think the whole thing about the in-law factor is to be clear about what the roles and responsibilities are for each dynamic, whether you're the father-in-law, the mother-in-law, the son-in-law, the daughter-in-law. And then someone said, well, Elaine, you should have also written a chapter about the farming son. Yes, absolutely, because he's the one in a rock and a hard place, wanting to take over the farm and be a main shareholder and have equity and assets and ownership, and yet he does not want to get divorced because he loves his wife and he really needs to stay married and have a great marriage. So it turned into a whole book being because we wanted it to be an actual textbook for all the ag schools across North America that do a communication class. And unfortunately, I think when you get an ag degree, you probably only spend 3 hours on communication, which is
right. I'm glad you mentioned this unwritten expectation. I believe that is a really core piece of breakdown of relationships. Could you expand on that a bit and maybe share a tool or two that can help us to understand or be more aware of maybe some of those expectations we have for other people that we're not even clearly aware of, and vice versa? How do we get those more apparent in our relationships?
Well, sure. And again, folks can just go to my website at ElaineFroese.com or FarmFamilyCoach.com. I keep talking about the website because it's rich with resources, but I have a 19-piece toolkit there that's free, downloadable as soon as people are finished listening to this podcast. So to get clear about unwritten expectations, there's a thing called the ultimate decision maker. So how many decisions are dad's full say and how many are the successor's full say, and which ones are you making together? Another way is to do the sheet called What Do You Want, or to actually just talk about, and I use a Beanie Baby bull, Dean, which I think is another practical tool. It's a talking stick. So when I'm holding the bull in my family meeting, I get to speak. And then when you want to speak, you say, Elaine, give me the bull. And I pass it to you. And then you talk about, this is really working for me, but I'm having a hard time with this expectation because I don't think it's fair. So really talking is the work. And I have a few tools where you can actually write things down. Another one that you can discover on my website is called the Key Challenge Audit, which is a checklist of 32 statements, and one of them is, are you having trouble with being fair to all family members? Are you having trouble expressing your thoughts effectively? Are you having trouble with financial planning? And the one that young farmers typically check off is decreasing anxiety over the uncertainty of my future. And the uncertainty of their future comes because they don't talk about expectations and they don't know what the plan is. And the plan is where there is going to be the transition of labor, which happens very quickly on farms, but the transition of management is a longer process, and the transition of ownership for some farms, unfortunately, is all tied up in the estate plan, which is the will, and they have no intention at all of sharing any ownership before they die, which just drives the next generation crazy.
I'd like to transition to that topic here shortly, and before we move on from this, I want your insights on this in-law, this brown egg challenge. It seems like that could easily be a spot where I could come into a family as the in-law or the outsider and kind of put myself into a victim position, like it's them against me and poor me. What's some of the responsibilities that I have as that in-law coming into that system, the family system, the business system, to make sure that I don't find myself as the victim in it?
Well, first of all, Dean, I have to declare I don't do victim. So there's a great book by Marilee Adams called Change Your Questions, Change Your Life. Are you going to become a learner and take responsibility for the choices you are making? Or are you going to become a judger and work yourself down into that victim thing of being in the pit and it's poor me, poor me? So my first thing is, how are you expressing your voice? Are you asking for what you need with respect and in an adult conversation-like manner? Are you also taking the time possibly to collect your thoughts on paper? Quite often now I'm asking young farmers to get in front of their computers and just write an actual letter to their parents. The daughter-in-law or the son-in-law could also do the same thing, and the mother-in-law, because it always goes both ways, right? There's always your perspective and my perspective. Another thing that they could do is become more self-aware about what their positive conflict strategies are. So do you have the ability as the daughter-in-law to think what it must feel like to be 62 years old, aging, being pushed to give up a lot of ownership and control over a family business that you've worked hard in for 40 years, and yet inside you have a deep sense of fear of failure or loss of identity. So it's really helpful for all generations to come from curiosity. So don't be a victim, be an adult, don't avoid the conflict, embrace it, but also be willing to share your emotions in a healthy kind of way. So there doesn't have to be a lot of yelling, screaming, swearing, or drama, but it is helpful if you can say, this really hurts me, or this really makes me feel like the brown egg and like I'm never going to be part of this family. What is it going to take for me to be accepted? What is it that I'm not doing that would be helpful to you? And I have another sheet called The Phrase That Pays, and it's a play on my name, but I was coaching a ranch family one time, and they said, Elaine, you have all these great one-liners. Can you give them to us all in one place? So I did, but one of the phrases I have, Dean, is you get the behavior that you accept. So if a daughter-in-law is not being treated well, I would encourage her to write down her thoughts on a piece of paper, ask for a meeting with her in-laws, with her husband beside her, and do it after lunch when everybody's been fed. Do it in a time of day when you're well rested and not rushed, and say, I really need to talk about what's going on here because this is really frustrating me. And taking it a step further is, do you have a forum in your farm for having business meetings that deal with the strategy and the vision and how the family's getting along on the farm business? Or do you have business meetings only for operations on how you're actually doing the day-to-day? And so that's where I encourage families to actually get a flip chart so they can start drawing out what they're needing and thinking. So here's the phrase: I think, I feel, I need, I want. I think it's time we had a family meeting. I'm feeling that my role is not really clear here, and I want to feel better about being part of this business, and I need clarity of expectation. And so that works itself out on a flip chart with a discussion, and then at the end of the meeting, everybody gets their smartphones out and takes pictures of the flip chart paper, and then you have an actual documentation of who promised to do what by when, which becomes your action log.
That's perfect.
Well, that's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, shifting into that transition you mentioned about, eventually, if we're lucky, our role does begin to shift as we get closer to retirement. For some, we might be 55 when that's happening. Others, we might be in our 70s. Regardless, it brings a new season and some different responsibility. What are some of the principles that you see at work in those most successful transitions?
So first of all, don't assume anybody's going to retire, because dads, 30% of the farmers in Iowa are never going to retire, according to a study that was done by the Beginning Farmers Club in Iowa. And in Canada, when I speak to a farm audience, I might have 4 or 5 hands that go up of people that are actually going to retire. So again, it's about language, Dean. So again, choose your words carefully. Dad, what does a good day on the farm look like to you as you age? What is your exit strategy for handing over being the main manager? And how are you going to reinvent yourself? And we're in this stage right now, Dean, on our own farm. My husband and I'm 62. My husband's 61. He had a very serious crash last October while he was checking soybean fields, and unfortunately knocked the wind out of him, fractured ribs, concussion, and just not the same kind of energy that he used to have. Thankfully, he's okay and he can work, but it's not the same as it used to be. So it's really important when you're talking about the transition is to put some timelines about it. So we were planning to move on in 2020, which is in my last book, but plans changed. And my mother-in-law always used to say, that was then and this is now. So this is now 2018, and my son and daughter-in-law, love them both, are building a brand new house right across my shelter belt because they want us to stay put on the main yard, but they also need to be on the main yard of our certified seed business and family farm. And so you have to be willing to adapt as you're going through the planning process, that this is the target date that you set for something to happen. But in our case, it got sped up by 2 years. We also have a coach, and we've sped up the transfer of one of our companies with ownership to our son and daughter-in-law earlier than what we originally intended. And so we're now in the process of working with tax specialists for that as well. So you see it more of a journey rather than a destination, but it does help to have timelines and targets so that you have deadlines and a timeliness of agreements. And with that flip chart that I talked about earlier, in your farm family, start writing down the date. So it's 2018 today, and say, by what date do you want to share management if you aren't doing it already? So you write that date down, and once you start writing things down on paper and putting dates and timelines on it, it makes it a lot more real, and it gets what it destroys or gets rid of what we call the neutral zone. And the neutral zone is a term by William Bridges, and it's the pain of not knowing. So when a young woman gets an engagement ring, she goes, oh, great, I'm going to get married. And then, of course, what's the next question?
When?
So the when question is what's keeping people up at night. Remember when I said decreasing the anxiety over the uncertainty of your future? Not only do the young farmers tick that off, the older farmers do, because they're having anxiety around what gives my life meaning and purpose as I age on this farm. And a lot of young people will say, Mom, Dad, you've worked your butt off for 40 years, so let's talk about how you're going to have a little bit more fun and how you're going to enjoy maybe doing some traveling or visiting the non-farm siblings halfway across the country while you still have the health and wealth to do that. And the other thing, Dean, which is helpful probably to your audience, is when you turn 65, which is typically brown envelope time here in Canada, and you get teased about what you're going to do when you retire, and most farmers will say, well, I'm not. There's 3 segments. There's 65 to 75, so that's the traveling, go get it, have fun stage. Things might shift in your health even before that, unfortunately, but then there's the 75 to 85 group where insurance gets higher when you turn 80, but then the 85 to 95 group. So you see what's happened? There's actually 3 segments of reinvention even after 65. And you better be sure you have a really good income stream for those segments.
It's a great perspective. For a lot of farms, that later transition involves some coaching and mentoring for the next generation, but that's kind of a new skill or a new position they find themselves in. What do you encourage farmers that have farmed 40, 50 years that are now becoming more of a mentor to the next generation? What are some tools that you encourage them to use or think about?
Well, one of them would be to encourage peer-to-peer networks of the next generation. So, for instance, our son belongs to a marketing club the next town over. And it's a great place for him to share ideas and be mentored by other farmers who are very successful in the next town over. And his father makes allowances for that to happen, right? Because there's always on a farm too much work and not enough time to complete it. And so you always have to prioritize what you're going to do. So I think first of all, being a lifelong learner, and even for the mentor. So, and also building relationships, I think, is really key, Dean, with your team of advisors. So we actually fired an advisor who did not treat our son well, and we gave him a year's notice. We said, look, you don't respect him, you don't get things on time for him, he delivers you stuff, you don't call him back. And we said, we're moving. And they were very shocked that we actually did what we said we would do. And we gave them a heads up. So we got a better, more local, proximate accountant who actually came to our meeting on her holidays with our farm coach, because she is bound and determined to serve our family well and serve us together. So there's financial transparency between both generations. So the second point would be to build your team of advisors together with the generations together, and also to build a relationship of financial transparency. I'm still shocked, Dean, that it's 2018 and I'm meeting people who haven't shared their wills or their estate plans with their executors or their next generation. That's crazy. It's 2018. We do business, and the families that are more communicative and more financially transparent will have a better chance of mentoring because there's no surprises.
Exactly.
And there's a culture in the farm of we're learning together. My husband's 61, but he's not done learning. He's, we go to meetings, or he goes to see association meetings, or he reads, but he's not as passionate about that as he used to be. So now the magazines are landing on my son's desk, not his.
Let's, as we bring our conversation home, Elaine, you speak to farm groups and farms throughout the year. For this audience, what's something, or any audience that you speak to, what's something that you really want to hit home, that you really want them to understand as you leave us here?
I have an old tagline, Dean, that I sometimes close my speeches with. Remember, it's your farm, it's your family, it's your choice. Coaches will often say counseling is about recovery, coaching is about discovery. What would you like to discover in this next 3 months, the rallying cry of your wintertime, about the role that you play for your own self-care, your marriage, your family, your farm, your off-farm job, your friends, and your community? Remember, you always get to wake up every morning and choose your response. And I'm wired for, as you may tell, communication, lifelong learning, positivity, empathy, and woo. And woo is winning others over. And my wiring is to be influential, to empower farm families to say, if you don't like the way things are going on your farm or in your family, what are you going to choose to do to make it better? And that's why my tagline is now to empower family, increase profit. The profitability comes from being able to speak and plan, which is what Dr. Cole's research has shown about the families that communicate regularly. And then the last piece is to secure your legacy, to know that this family is going to continue farming for many more generations because they have a rock and roll farm. They get along, they resolve conflict, and they attack the issue, not the person. It's an amazing way to live.
Excellent. Joining me today has been Elaine Froese, who speaks, writes, and consults on the dynamics around the business of the family farm. Elaine, if people want to learn more about your work, where should they go?
Go to farmfamilycoach.com. Download all the tools out of my Farm Family Toolkit. Order my books. I have an audio book now because farmers told me they don't have time to read. So my latest book is available at audible.com, and it's called Building Your Farm Legacy. My name is spelled Froese, so that's why I have farmfamilycoach.com, so I'm easy for podcast people to find me. I also coach over Zoom.us, which is video conferencing. And Dean, if you're involved with a farm bureau or an ag association in the U.S., be more than happy to come and serve your group. I also have a YouTube channel, so if you Google Finding Fairness in Farm Transition, my YouTube channel will come up, and quite often people use me as a coach through YouTube, and I come visit them first on YouTube, and then after they've listened to me for an hour, then they have their family meeting. So there's all different kinds of ways to connect, and I just encourage folks to take the first step.
Great. And we'll have links to those in our show notes. Elaine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Dean, and blessings to every family listening to this, and happy Thanksgiving to all our American friends. It helps to be grateful for what we have.
Absolutely.